Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers. I have his sleeper options this week. The first guy, Will Lutz of the New Orleans Saints. Lutz available 91% of fantasy leagues. And last week here, he had a big 60-yarder and then almost tied the ball game in London to go to overtime. But a 61-yarder hit the side of the crossbar, then hit the front, and didn't go through the upright. So right now, this week, a good matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks. I give up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. Another indoor game at home in New Orleans here for Will Lutz. We know he's been a good kicker in the past of his career, and so far this season, for the most part, he's been an alright kicker. Week 1, 10 fantasy points. Week 2, 4. Week 3 at the Panthers, 2. And last week, 7. But it would have been 12 if he hit that 50-yarder. So with a good matchup and a potential shootout ball game this week here, Will Lutz is definitely a kicker I have as a sleeper this week. The next guy, Randy Bullock, Tennessee Titans. So Randy Bullock, we know he's had a couple games this season where he's had a decent ball game. Week 1 versus the Giants, 9. Week 2 with Buffalo, 1. Week 3 and Week 4, 7 fantasy points. So right here, Week 5, a good matchup at the Commanders. I give up the 4th most fantasy points to kickers. And offenses, they drive up and down the field here on this Commander team this season. We saw Brett Maher get double-digit fantasy points last week. And the way this Tennessee offense is constructed, where they don't finish a lot of drives in the end zone, I could see Randy Bullock getting a couple opportunities and a few extra points in this one. And he's available right now, 98% of fantasy leagues. If you need a kicker in deeper leagues this week, and the third and final kicker I have as a sleeper option this week's Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. I like a lot of Seahawks this week here in New Orleans. This Seahawk offense has looked good. Geno Smith, believe it or not, he's looked like a pretty legit quarterback this season with the good weapons in Metcalf, Lockett. That obviously going to help. And will this be in a tight end he leans on in the red zone? But anyway, Jason Myers, the last 2 weeks he has had big fantasy days. Week 3 versus Atlanta, 11 fantasy points. And Week 4 Detroit, 14 fantasy points. And right here, Week 5 in New Orleans, they give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Myers, just like Randy Bullock, available in 98% of fantasy leagues here. And like I said, this ball game could be a mini shootout, mid-20s, maybe hitting the 30s in this one between these two teams, because we know Seattle's not great on defense. And we also know that if Jameis Winston don't play, Andy Dalton, he's definitely a quarterback that could be prone to turnovers and getting sacked and stuff, even though last week he looked pretty decent for the most part versus Minnesota. But right here, Myers, if you need a kicker, indoor game and a great matchup, he's definitely a good sleeper option this week. So that's a few kickers I have as sleepers here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.